Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. Super excited today to welcome a writer I've been a big fan of for a while. First time on the show. It's my pleasure to welcome Dan Waters. Dan, thanks for taking the time.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a ton of your DC stuff in the past, from the Arkham New World Order to Azrael stuff, and now you're over in the Energon universe handling Destro, which comes out this week, everybody. In fact, the day we're releasing this, Destro 1's on stand, so hopefully you got a chance to pick it up at your comic shop today, or you will be picking it up later today. So let me ask you, being over in the UK, Dan, what was your first exposure to G.I. Joe and this character?
Extremely limited, to be honest. We didn't really get it in the same way, at least not when I was a kid. We had a thing called Action Man when I was a kid, which was a very like James Bondified version of the thing, which had spun out of Action Force, which I think was a more accurate but sort of transposed across the pond G.I. Joe with the same kind of characters, but most of the sort of familiar trappings were gone by the time it became Action Man, which is what I grew up with. So really, I came to this very fresh. This was a new universe to me, but luckily the Energon universe is a whole new kettle of fish as well. So I was kind of starting from the ground up with the characters.
Cool. So Destro's always been one of my favorites. I always found Cobra Commander to be kind of corny and make dumb decisions or whatever. But Destro in the background always kind of shaking his head, being like, "Dude, what are you doing? Why are you making these decisions?" So when you had a chance to do this, to pitch for the series, did you go back and watch a bunch of the cartoons? Like, what was your initial impression of Destro? Give us a little background on kind of coming up with the idea of who this version of Destro will be.
Yeah, I mean the editors sort of pointed me towards source materials to connect with, and a lot of it was the Larry Hama comics and the original sort of 80s cartoons. And I watched some of the more recent stuff just to get a handle on what people have been doing with the materials since. Um, and obviously I was looking at stuff with a sort of Destro centric eye. But it was somewhat a relief to find that even when the sort of tone of the different iterations of the show or whatever would change, Destro was pretty consistent. He's uh, pretty firm and confident in who he is, and I think who he is sort of interesting enough that it never changes very much between different versions. So in creating this version of Destro, it was just trying to stay true to that. Really, it was trying to and maybe get a little deeper into it since it's his first solo spotlight.
Yeah, it's first time in a solo series. Are you feeling any pressure at all? I mean, Destro does have his fans.
I always try and put that kind of feeling in a box and put it on a shelf when I come to write anything. Once you've sort of danced with Batman and Superman and these kind of things, where some of the greatest works in the medium have been done with them. If you feel too much pressure from that, I think it will squish you, or it will drive you to make something very derivative. And I never really want to make a fan letter or make something which just feels like I'm excited to be in the room with the thing. It's always about trying to tell a story and dig into something new and interesting with whatever's the raw material that's handed to you.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, and I appreciate that because your work does always feel like you're coming at things from a very different angle. You have a very unique way of looking at things. Um,
I appreciate that.
yeah, and
Thank you.
I wouldn't yeah I wouldn't say your stuff's weird, but again, it's again, like so much of the stuff you've done deals with supernatural and what have you. And so it opens up a world where you can come at it from a different angle, and it kind of removes the limitations of your storytelling. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's I think it's probably pretty worn on my sleeves that the stuff that influenced me to want to do this as a job was the sort of initial British invasion stuff. So the M.A.R. and the Morrison and the game and stuff. And I think that was the ethos that a lot of that stuff took. So to be honest, I just came into this medium thinking that that's what you did, and that's what that was the point of doing it,
Right.
was to always try and uh, my friend Alex Packnadell, he writes all kinds of fantastic comics. He refers to it as moving the camera. So if a character is being sort of presented from one angle for most of a lineage, you just want to move the camera. So you're not changing the character. You're not trying to turn it into something else. You're just trying to find that different angle on what's already implicitly there, or try and set them against something that puts a new kind of challenge against them. But I always find like the weird thing, the W word. I feel like at this point sometimes when and people say it as a compliment, they'll be like, "Oh, this is really cool and weird, or whatever." And weird always makes me feel like I failed a little bit because I always want to be able to present something as especially when you are presenting stuff that's very strange or sort of out of the box. And if you can make that feel, if you can sort of creep that in a way that makes it feel uh, kind of natural to the world that you're working in, that's where I feel like I've succeeded.
Yeah, I would say that's a great way to put it. Yeah, Alex, I know he's been on the show before. Yeah, moving the camera, that's an excellent way to put it. So, but when you're doing something like this, you mentioned you did your background work, read some previous iterations, the classic 83 cartoon, and how Destro has been pretty consistent throughout, which sort of makes it easy for you in terms of creating a story. You know who he is in terms of characterization. But then is it a challenge to find a new angle to tell a story with Destro?
I mean, not so much just again that this is a sort of spotlight that he hasn't necessarily had much of before, and because the Energon universe is, sort of fledgling version of this of this story. So GI Joe's not a thing yet. Cobra's just sort of gearing up to become a thing.
Hmm.
So there's so much mileage in that, and who was Destro before he was in Cobra, and really what makes him stick around when like you said, in particularly in certain versions, Cobra Commander seems like this kind of bumbling leader, and Destro's he's an international arms dealer. He's a very rich, powerful man in his own right. So what keeps him sticking around as the number two of this kind of organization? And so I thought there was tons of mileage and all of that. And also, who was he before he was sort of attached to Cobra Commander's hit? Um, what drives him to do what he does? There's loads of I think there's loads of sort of layers of him to sort of drill into.
Yeah, that is interesting that they got a writer from the UK, right? Because if you look at Destro's lineage, go back, and again, this hasn't been explored a lot, but he's got, going back centuries of previous Destros, with his ancestors and what have you, also from the UK, Scotland, I believe. Um, does it give you a leg up there? I mean, you're kind of sort of familiar with, the ancestry and, monarchy and that sort of thing. You're drawing from old grade school history and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe a leg up in that, I'm well versed in what nasty British people are like.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but yeah. I mean, there was one of those. There's one episode of the '83 cartoon that I did watch in preparation. It's the one where they go to Destro's castle in Scotland. And my favorite thing about that is that they just find a Lovecraftian, like, big-eyed tentacled monster under the castle, and they sort of beat it and get away from it and go, "Oh, that was weird," and never mention it ever again.
Right.
That brought me joy.
Yeah, the joys of those cartoons. Continuity light, we'll say. Uh, well, maybe I should have started with this. So, for anybody who's not familiar, maybe they've been wanting to jump into the Energon universe. Maybe it's been daunting, but they love G.I. Joe. Destro's their favorite character, and they're like, okay, now's my time. I'm gonna dip my toe into the Energon universe, into this version of G.I. Joe at Skybound with Destro. How would you pitch the book to somebody who's not sure or kind of on the fence? What is this story to you?
Um, it's not so much an origin story, but it's the story of a very rich, powerful arms dealer whose family have always been arms dealers, and he feels this great pressure of continuing this lineage. But that gets harder and harder as the world moves towards the future, and particularly in the Energon universe, where things are starting to change. There's technology from outer space and new energy sources that are popping up. Um, but Destro's always at the edge of that. He hasn't been sort of given granted a lot of access to to know what's going on. So it's a story of a man trying to not get left behind by the future, and pretty convinced that if he is, it'll kill him. So you don't need to know a lot about anything that's happened beforehand because Destro doesn't.
Yeah, and so we had Duke previously. We had Cobra Commander, Scarlet's going on right now. Those were 5 issues. Is this one going to be 5 issues as well?
Yeah, this is 5 issues as well. All written, all wrapped at this point.
Talk a little bit about the collaboration with your artist, Andrei Bressan, because I mean his art is just spectacular. Destro's never looked so menacing, but also sort of regal in a way.
Yeah, I mean Andre is fantastic, and I think the real trick with this book was finding a way for Destro's sort of very operatic sort of visual to make sense in a slightly more grounded sort of tech thriller kind of story. Um, I've sort of described him a few times as looking like a pro wrestling vampire, and that's definitely his thing, and that's not going to change. But we wanted to put that around a slightly more sort of, I don't want to say gritty, but like this sort of real world weapons tech and cutting edge sort of arms manufacturing happening all around him, and that's very much the tone of the book. I sort of thought of it as more of a sort of big widescreen war comic, and Andre I think has just approached it in exactly the same way. My sort of ethos with a story particularly like this is you want to give the art as much room to breathe as possible. If you're writing big sort of explosions and despoilers blowing each other out the sky and combat drones flying over everything, you don't want to then be covering that up with a bunch of lettering, a ton of balloons and captions that are going to slow everything down. So it's been a joy to see the pages roll in, and he's very much gone the same route I had in my head with lots of, everything goes out to the bleed, um, everything's blowing up all the time. I've written in some really kooky stuff and sort of upcoming issues. We've got, sort of half constructed bats fighting. Well, I would say who they're fighting because that's for later. Um, but yeah, everything I've thrown at him, he's very much risen to.
Yeah, the other thing, again, we don't want to get too spoilery, everybody, but I will say that for the first time in the Energon universe, we get a chance to look at a couple of other arms dealers that are, on the wrong side of the law, twins, if you will. You got to do the debut of them. Was that kind of fun to throw them into the book as well?
Yeah, the Crimson Twins. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. They're on the covers,
Yeah.
and the poster. But yeah, that was an interesting one. That was kind of one of the few things that I was asked to do out the gate. Was that the hope was this book would introduce them. But because none of these characters are in Cobra yet, and they're traditionally different arms of Cobra. Um, it was an interesting sort of challenge to look at these twins who are also in the war business, um, also CEOs of a influential, powerful company, and think about what made them distinct from Destro, what makes their ethos very different to Destro's ethos, to the point that um, that they come to loggerheads in this book. And I think really once I found that, I found the core of the book, the core of what the story is. So the twins were kind of invaluable for the story.
Yeah, they're great. I remember them from the cartoon as well. And you paid homage to that where they're kind of finish each other's thoughts and sentences as well, which was
Uh-huh.
that was fun to see. Um, Let me ask you this. So, not a huge history, as you said, with G.I. Joe, and yeah, over in the UK it was Action Man and not G.I. Joe. But was Destro like when you got approached to do this, was it specifically Destro, or did they say, "Hey, which character would you like to do?" Was he somebody that really interested you?
Um, it wasn't. I was approached for Destro. I think that was more a conversation that I had before they brought me in. Because I was already working with Skybound on the Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives. Um, and Josh Williamson, who's sort of spearheading a lot of the GI Joe side of things. I think he was talking to the editors, and they were mulling over what the next line of books was going to be, which stories they wanted to sort of flesh out. Uh, and I think when, or I'm told when Destro was mentioned, my name came up relatively quickly. Which yes might have something to do with Britishness and my sort of penchant for horrible, horrible characters. I'd done Lucifer, I was doing Loki at the time, and Destro's a bit of a jump from those, but he's a similar sort of ego, I guess, and he has a similar way of using people. And I always find those characters very fun. These characters who sort of manipulate the world around them to suit their needs. They sort of make people think that they're doing what they want when they're really, getting what they want out of it.
Yeah, well, if the first issue is any judge, this is going to be a spectacular series, everybody. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. It's fantastic. Dan really does have a penchant for writing these type of characters, like you said. And so immediately my mind goes, okay, who else, right? We haven't seen Zartan yet. Let me see you do a Zartan series. But we don't want to pigeonhole you to have you only do villains. If you were to write a spotlight for somebody on the Joe side, one of the heroes, who would anybody come to mind that you would like to do?
Uh, Honestly, I think doing some sort of like ensemble work would be the next move if that was kind of I'd like to do a sort of like strike team or something would probably be the next place my head would go rather than a spotlight.
Yeah, something with like you get to pick a few different characters, do
Uh,
Scarlet,
yeah, I mean everyone wants to do
Snake
Snake
Eyes.
Eyes. Let's be real, like
Yeah.
he's the guy, uh, but yeah, I don't know. I'd probably I think if I was given free reign, yeah, I'd inevitably end up sort of deep diving and finding some weird, obscure stuff and sticking that together.
Yeah, maybe somebody really strange like Shipwreck was always a favorite with this parrot, or Junkyard with his dog. I don't know why I'm picking
Yeah,
guys like
that's the
that,
stuff.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
do a sort of Paw Patrol, GI Joe.
All right, Joshua, if you're listening, yeah, put G.I. Joe Paw Patrol for Dan. Uh,
There could be some licensing issues there, but
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
wrinkle it out.
Maybe. Well, like I said, I dug the first issue, everybody. It's in your comic shops today. If you're listening to this as today it drops, make sure you get out there and pick up a copy, choose your favorite cover, what have you. Also, don't forget, once you've checked it out, you're going to fall in love with it. Let your retailer know, hey, I want the rest of the series. Pre-orders are the lifeblood and really help out both the comic shop and the creative team,
Surely.
and Skybound as well. So as we're winding down here, Dan, let's finish up with this. In terms of crafting the story, when you started putting it all together, okay, I got 5 issues, let me pace it out and what have you. Were there any specific challenges that came up? Anything that was kind of unexpected, or did you find that you kind of had the Destro story and feel and characterization down right from the start?
Yeah, honestly, the latter. It can so go one way or the other when you're writing something, and sometimes the outlining can go very easily And then that turns out to be very deceptive, and the scripts take forever. Um, but this one, I think we rejigged the ending a few times just to make sure everything sort of dovetailed nicely and led into whatever it is that comes next. Um, but it really this book was one of those very sort of flowy, easy ones to write. And frankly, I tend to find that those are the best ones when they come out, when you haven't run into a load of sort of sticky plot points that you've banged your head against, when a story just kind of wants to fall out of you and be told. Those are the best, both in terms of their joy to write, and I think they tend to be the best on the page as well.
Yeah,
And this was
well,
definitely one of those.
I can definitely say, as somebody who's been reading comics for decades, when the creative team's having fun doing it, that comes across for us as readers, and we can tell, and we enjoy it that much more. So hopefully, we're going to see you more in this Energon universe. I know you probably can't say because things aren't finalized and what have you, but it seems like you'd love to do more in this universe. Would you say that's true?
I mean, I've had a hell of a time on this one. So yeah, if there's an angle, then I'd be there.
Fantastic. Well, if people want to follow your work, I mentioned other stuff you've done, DC, you mentioned your Loki work over at Marvel. Where's the best place to follow you, have a presence online or what have you?
Yeah, I am at Dan PG Waters, uh, on Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram and all the usual suspects. Although I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. So I'll put links to Dan's social media in the show notes, everybody. If you're having trouble finding them, you can go and click there. Highly encourage you to follow him. Incredible writer, super talented. So, Dan, best of luck with Destro. I have a feeling the first issue is going to sell out. It's fantastic. And thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thanks very much, Jace. It's very kind. It's been a pleasure.
And to all you listeners, want to thank you for your support as always. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.